and they all lived happily ever after.
Oh, hi. You know, the doctor told me these new reading glasses would work, but I'm not so sure. Welcome to How to Write. This video series is based on the textbook I've developed as a teacher over 15 years. Everything you ever wanted to know about writing but were afraid to ask. You can get it from Amazon. Here is the ISBN number. Today we're going to look at comma rule number 2. One of the reasons it is important that we understand basic sentence structure is because it helps us clarify our thinking when we write. Now, of course, this is not just about writing, this is about thinking, and it's not just about thinking when we write. There is strong evidence to suggest that cognitive development and literacy development go hand in hand. So when we exercise the ability to be fully literate on the page, we think more clearly about situations we're in, and our analysis of situations becomes clearer. So this is basically called cognitive development. They might call it critical thinking in college, but really it's just thinking about things clearly and trying to make sense of them. And because basic sentences are our building blocks of thought in many respects, it's important that we understand how the language is used on the page. If you remember, I mentioned that there are 3 basic comma rules that we were going to look at. As a writing teacher of 15 years experience, and after sitting down with thousands and thousands of student writers at college level, the most common problem that surfaced in most writers' work, basic sentence structure, basic comma usage. And I'm not just talking about 60% of writers, I'm talking easily 90% of writers that I have encountered did not understand basic sentence structure and basic punctuation. And as I mentioned in the introduction to this series, it's not their fault, they were simply never taught it. So that's why we're working through these basic comma rules, and here we go with comma rule number 2. If you remember, in our last lesson we looked at comma rule number 1. Do you remember what comma rule number 1 stated? We looked at conjunctions. And, but, and so are the most commonly used, and we were putting clauses together. Do you remember what goes into a clause? What does a clause look like? We need a subject, and we need a verb. So there's our subject, there's our verb. So how many clauses do we have in this sentence? We have 1. We have a subject going with a verb. They are connected here. So do we have another subject and verb that connect together? Yes, we do. We've got 2 clauses in one sentence. The car sped, the cops chased. They're joined together with a comma and a conjunction. So comma rule number 1, if you remember, says that when you join more than one clause, if there are 2 or more clauses in a sentence, they have to be joined with a comma and a conjunction. The car sped down the road and the cops chased it. Now I could join another clause to this. In fact, I've joined 2 clauses, right? Can you see them? Was is a verb of existence. We'll have a quick review of those types of verbs in a minute. So here we have another clause. The car was faster. The driver escaped. So we have got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 clauses in this sentence. And each time I am signaling the reader that, hey, here's a comma and a conjunction, so there's a new clause coming. Here's a comma and a conjunction, so there's a new clause coming. Now, we're not trying to teach the reader how to read. We are trying to teach the reader how to read your writing. This is a code system that clarifies for the reader the sentence structure that is about to come. So think of it a little bit as like driving a car. If I see a yield sign, I don't stop and think about what it must mean. I have to respond to that sign. So it's a little bit like that with this kind of signaling. As I read a sentence, as soon as I see a comma and conjunction, I don't stop what I'm doing and go, oh, there must be another clause coming. No, I understand instinctively after a while. If the writing is good, I understand instinctively what I'm about to be processing in the form of the structure of this sentence. So these commas and conjunctions are for the reader. Now let's have a quick refresher on these verbs of existence. We all know the basic verbs. The boy walked, the girl sang, the sun shines. These are verbs, action verbs, right? They denote action. I know this is simplistic, but bear with me. We have verbs of existence. Is. He is, she is. He was, she was. So these are verbs of existence. We also have verbs of possession. Simple little things, just a refresher here because we need to know what a verb looks like, and that's why this is a clause. The message will be clear. The reader needs, the driver escaped. So clauses are where the subject and verb goes together. As simple as this is essential to have ingrained in your writing. Okay, so now we're going to look at comma rule number 2. And I'm going to call this conditional phrases. Comma rule number 2 is similar to comma rule number 1 in that we are going to use commas to separate clauses. When we looked at comma rule number 1, we had a comma between this clause and this clause. And we have a comma between this clause and this clause. And they have conjunctions with them. However, I'm going to break comma rule number 1. When the girl sang, everyone cried. Now, maybe the music was so beautiful, everybody was moved deeply by it, or maybe she was a terrible singer and just, help, let me out of here. But how many clauses do you see in this sentence? 2 clauses, separated by a comma. But hold on a minute. In comma rule number 1, I said that commas and conjunctions have to go together when you're separating 2 clauses. Comma rule number 2 is immediately breaking comma rule number 1. How is it that we can do this? Well, I'm going to write another sentence like this. See if you can determine what's going on here. Now this is a clunky sentence, I have to admit. So I'm going to rewrite that. Rather than had dinner, I ate dinner. It's a better verb. Okay, a nicer sentence. After I arrived home, subject, verb. Subject, verb, comma, separating two clauses. Why is it that I can break comma rule number 1? Why is it that I do not need a conjunction here? Well, there's a conditional phrase at the start of the sentence. Did you see that? There's a condition applied. If the weather is hot, I will go swimming. Subject, verb, subject, verb. And there's a condition, if the weather is hot. Now, there are a handful of these conditional kind of phrases. And as soon as I see a sentence starts with a conditional phrase of this type, I will know what the structure is going to be. And again, this acts as some kind of coding to the reader. I will see this conditional phrase, and I will know that this is not a complete idea. I need a second clause, and that'll be separated by this comma. And again, this signals the reader. It's not for the writer, because usually the writer knows exactly what they're thinking. However, when you're writing something that is of importance to someone else or to you or to your community, you want to be very clear. So these are the methods we have for clarity. Basic punctuation. You know what? I'm going to make it even simpler than that. Since winter arrived, subject, verb, subject, verb. Condition. So this is comma rule number 2. Don't underestimate the simplicity of this lesson. I know I've said it before and I'll continue to say it. These are simple sentences to demonstrate the rule or the idea behind the structure and the punctuation. Now, I'm assuming that as you improve as a writer, or even now, depending on the line of work you're in, you may be writing quite complicated letters to people or proposals or reports, or maybe you're just a kid in high school trying to get through high school and turn in a decent essay. You will still be writing probably much more complicated sentences than these. But these same structures will still apply. These rules do not go away. So let's have a look at what we've got in the workbook, page 66. So here we have a condition, whenever. I go to a track meet, subject, verb, comma, I win most of the races. See, 2 clauses in a sentence. Then the textbook explains that, well, we've broken rule number 1. Comma rule number 1 said we had to have a conjunction, and we don't. And that is because we have a conditional phrase, whenever. Now, I don't press the idea of learning the linguistic phrases that explain these types of structures. You're welcome to go ahead and try and learn them if you want to. To me, it seems much more important that you understand the simple basic structure and that you can recognize it on the page and that you can apply it to your writing. It's not only good for the reader, but when you have finished your work, before you submit it, you need to read it yourself and edit it for accuracy and for clarity. And if you are not clear on basic punctuation and basic sentence structure, how could you ever edit your own work clearly? So you, too, will become a reader of your own work at some point. So brainiacs call this structure a dependent clause, and what that means is that one thing won't happen until the other thing happens. One clause depends on the other one for an outcome. Since I turned 21, I am allowed in bars. So, conditional phrase here. Subject, verb phrase. Subject, verb. Because the road was slick with oil, the car skidded into the curb. Subject, verb, subject, verb. After the dog gorged itself, it threw up on the rug. Yuck. Once the rug is cleaned up, you will see that each sentence starts with a condition attached. To recap, when you use a conditional phrase, comma, you can break rule number 1. Subject, verb. Subject, verb. See how it works? Very simple, but apply this consistently. I recommend that you work through the workbook, see where the commas go, learn how to separate clauses, learn how to signal your reader so that they can follow along and understand your message clearly. Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope you'll come back and join me when we look at comma rule number 3. From there we will go on and look at other styles of punctuation. One of the reasons it is important to understand this basic simple sentence structure concept, and why it's important to understand basic commas, as simple as they are, is because semicolons, colons, all this other kind of sentence structure is built on understanding how commas work. So it's a very good place to start. I think I'm going to have to talk to my optometrist. See you soon. Keep writing. Bye.